relic system in Nightreign is extremely important. You could have some that literally boost your damage output by upwards of 25 to 30%, but also give you incredible bonuses to your character's skills and arts, and even change the status effects you can put on your starting weapon, giving you a heads up against any knight boss. So yes everybody, welcome back to another video on this channel where I'm going to be discussing the best effects you can have on relics, and I'm just going to say this now, of course when you're playing this game you will randomly get some of these effects that I'm going to be talking about. However, some of them can also be obtained through characters' remembrance quests or even the shops that are available to purchase relics from, and I will obviously do my best to point out where and when you can get these. But essentially I'm more just going to be giving you guys a lowdown on what sort of benefits you want to be looking for when you do get relics at the end of each expedition, because some effects are extremely useful and give you an insane benefit to your characters, whereas others give you literally hardly anything. And just to give you a little bit of like the structure of this video, first of all I am going to be talking about relics that directly impact your damage output and your character's stats, so anything that boosts like say stamina recovery, as well as any general damage output, before then moving on to relics that help you out during the expedition, such as bonuses at the beginning, before then talking about character alts and skills. So we've basically got 3 categories to go through, and as I mentioned, the first one we're going to be talking about is going to be based around stats and damage output, so you could say offensive buffs, but essentially the ones you want to be looking out for are the buffs that give you a percentage based increase. Essentially there are buffs to all stats, so vigor, mind, endurance, and even strength, dexterity, faith, arcane, and intelligence, that will either give you a +1, +2, or +3. These will all just be a flat bonus to those respective stats, and the actual buff you get from that particular buff is minuscule, like it's tiny, it's not even worth putting on. So if you are say someone like Recluse and you see you've got a relic that has a +3 to intelligence, you might immediately be like, oh wow, that's really cool, and it does help out in the beginning levels. However, as you naturally progress through the game, that buff actually gets weaker and weaker. And then just for a direct comparison, if you get yourself the magic damage increase buff, whether that's the base one, the +1 or +2, that is a percentage based buff. So the base magic improvement is going to give you a 4.5% buff to all magic based attacks, the +1 gives a 5.5% buff, and the +2 gives a 6.5% buff. Those buffs are the same for all the different damage types, so if you get a holy damage increasing buff, again the base is 4.5, the +1's 5.5, and the +2 6.5%, and you can get that for basically any element as well as just base physical damage. So those are the ones you want to be looking out for. If you have strength +3, try not to use it if you can, and try and look for something that increases your physical attack power, because you'll be getting a much better result with that, because again, much like how we learnt from base game Elden Ring, percentage based buffs are king. They will always give you so much more damage output compared to just a flat base to your stats, and essentially the same thing is being applied in Nightreign. So always be on the lookout for relic buffs like this that have the damage type written inside and either have the base value +1 or +2, and then obviously apply the correct one for whatever damage output you're looking to be doing with your characters. But there are also a plethora of universal relic upgrades you can find, such as taking damage, increasing the amount of damage that you deal, which actually gives you a +15% to your damage output for 10 seconds whenever you get hit by an enemy, which can of course be extremely useful for the more tanky options like Guardian, Raider, and even Wilder, but essentially can be put on anybody, because if you play the game like I do, running and gunning everywhere, you're pretty much going to get tagged by something, so you basically have a free 15% buff to your damage output whenever you're engaging in a fight. That does also buff ultimates, which I know most ultimates you have iframes for whilst you're using them, but more specifically with the Raider, if you're using your skill, which is obviously headbutting or punching enemies if you've got the charged version, if you get hit whilst using that particular skill, that will actually give you the 15% buff on top of whatever other buffs you got going on with that skill, meaning that skill in particular can become very, very potent. Another really cool damaging buff is of course the critical hit bonus, which the base value one gives you 15% bonus to your crit damage, and the +1 gives you a 20% buff. Both of these actually do do stack, and if you've beaten the new Gaping Jaw, the Dark Sovereign event, you'll actually be able to come to the new shop using the new currency to purchase this particular relic, which has both of them active, which of course, if you are the one getting the crits most of the time in co-op, or more specifically in solo, this could be really useful, especially if you get the other buff during your expedition, which makes enemies weaker after the riposte as well. This can obviously synergize tremendously with that. And another couple of relic buffs that can synergize really well are the status effect buffs, like giving you extra damage if a poison, bleed, or scarlet rot happens in the near vicinity, and if those effects either happen to you or another enemy, you'll be granted a 12% damage buff for 20 seconds. There's actually another similar effect where you can have additional attack power when facing enemies that are frostbitten, rotted, or poisoned. These effects need to be actively on the enemy, so for example, if you frostbite an enemy, you will then be doing an extra 10% damage whilst they are frostbitten, and that goes on top of the actual frostbite effects as well that make them weaker to your attacks too. So if you are using a build where you can put, say, Chilling Mist on a weapon and have a poison weapon, or maybe some poisonous darts, you can poison the enemy, frostbite them to give yourself 2 lots of the 10% buff whilst you're attacking them, whilst also getting the 12% buff for 20 seconds whenever a poison happens in the near vicinity, obviously allowing you to deal monstrous damage just purely with status effects. These are kind of like the best offensive buffs that you can get in the game, in my opinion, just because they give some of the biggest damage outputs and stack with the relevant effect that's going on to the enemy as well. So whether that's damage over time with the poison, or huge damage with the bleed, or huge damage with the frostbite, just know that you can't stack them multiple times. So like if you're running, say, 2 relics that both have the attack power up whilst facing a frostbite afflicted enemy, you will only be getting that buff once. You won't be getting it twice, so you won't get 20%, you only get the 10%. You can get the 30% by running all 3 of them separately, you just can't stack 2 of the same to do more damage. But something you can stack in your games is the items that you pick up in the expeditions, and there's actually a lot of buffs you can get for hoarding certain types of weaponry or shields or even sills and staves, where you can get bonuses to attack power by holding 3 or more of a certain weapon type, so whether that be great swords, colossal weapons, bows. If you're holding 3 or more in your inventory, you'll be getting a 10% buff to your damage output, but then if you have the one for sills and staves that boost your FP, you'll be getting a plus 50 maximum amount of FP, which is equivalent to 10 mind points. And then if you have the one that boosts your HP, if you're holding 3 or more shields, you will then be getting plus 200 max HP, which again is equivalent to plus 10 in your vigor stat. This is kind of why I mentioned earlier that going for the standard +1s, +2s, +3s in regular stats is kind of like null and void, because you've got things like this going on which give you, say, a +10 equivalent, which is obviously much better, and with the specific ones that require you to hold up to 3 items of the same type in your games, you will also hopefully be getting some really good passives from those items, whether that be increased damage output of full HP, continuous HP recovery, skill FP usage reduced, and so on and so on. So you're going to be basically picking up these items anyway and be getting a much better buff if you do so. And although there's unfortunately not a similar one for endurance, we do actually have one that gives you stamina back on every successful hit. This is actually really good if you're power stancing again with someone like a raider or wilder, using the greatswords, hammers, colossal weapons to do a lot of damage and also some relatively decent stance damage too. But essentially every time you make a successful connection with either one of those weapons, if you are power stancing or just anytime you hit an enemy with your regular weapon, you will gain +2 to your stamina, which is actually quite good. And especially paired with raider, you can do a lot of jumping attacks, as you're hopefully seeing on screen right now. Use your skill afterwards to either punch or headbutt somebody, getting your full stamina bar back, and basically rinse and repeat this method until the enemy or boss is fully depleted. So yeah, this can be really good and paired really well with some of the other ones that we've just mentioned. But as I say, other than just avoiding the generic stat boosting ones and making sure you're going for the percentage based increases, those are kind of like the best attacking and stat stat-based relic buffs that you can find. Unfortunately, most of these are not going to be able to be bought through the shop, so you will just have to find them naturally through your many expeditions. And again, talking about your expeditions, these next lot of relic buffs will help you out tremendously, because another group of relic buffs that are really helpful are again those that give a percentage-based buff based upon what you do throughout your game. So again, there's going to be a whole bunch of buffs like giving you a damage buff for every time you complete an Evergel boss, and this buff actually gives you a plus 5% bonus to your damage output per Evergel. Obviously, in each game there's around sort of 6 to 7 Evergels, so if you wanted to go absolutely crazy, clearing out all of the garrisons to get as many Stone Sword keys as possible, you could potentially get yourself a 30 to 35% buff to your damage output by the end of your expedition for essentially free. And of course, the Evergel bosses also give relatively decent rewards as well, so it's actually not a bad plan. And you can also pair that with some starting bonuses, like starting the game with a Stone Sword key. That is one that you can find on Relics, and actually one that you can buy in the brand new shop after beating the Dark Sovereign boss. It is a yellow relic, as you can see here. You can buy it and have both of those buffs active at the same time, so essentially every single game you can get yourself a 5% buff for free, and then maybe go and find 1 or 2 more Stone Sword keys and again get to 15%. But if you want to go absolutely crazy, killing all of them, then you can get yourself up to 35% buffs. And there's actually another similar effect that you can get on Relics, giving you an additional attack power whenever you defeat a Night Invaders. Night Invaders are those phantoms that spawn in around the stormy parts of the map, so when you drop in you'll have a point of interest that is covered in like a dark storm, and inside that storm you will be invaded by an NPC invasion of another Nightfarer. Again, if you're playing co-op, you can have 2 of them spawn in one location, and this buff gives you a 7% buff to your damage output for each Nightfarer that you defeat. Now, of course, this relic is a little bit more RNG based, because it depends whether you even get any of these areas where the Nightfarers can invade, but sometimes you can have 2 of those locations, and if you've got that relic on and you happen to get 2 Nightfarers spawn in each location, that's obviously 28% damage output added to your character, which is obviously very good. But other than just damage outputs, there's also things tied to FP based on what you do in expeditions, because there is a relic bonus that permanently increases your FP whenever you unlock a Sorcerer's Rise. So yes, it's those mage towers that you can find, and essentially every time that you find that sigil and break it, and therefore release the barrier in the Rise, you will then get a 17.5% increase to your FP. Again, is a little bit RNG based as to how many rises spawn in your games. I believe in this example I'm actually showing you on screen, I only got 1, but if you are maining Recluse all the time, there's always going to be at least 1, but more often than not, typically 2 or 3. And if there are multiple rises as you're going through trying to find the churches or going to whatever points of interest you and your crew are going to, you can quickly see if you can unlock the rise, get yourself a nice boost to your FP, meaning you can spam even more spells, claim even more in residue, and just have an outright ridiculous FP bar. This can also be extremely useful for someone like Revenant 2, or anybody that you're using a lot of skill powers on. Maybe you pick yourself up the Rivers of Blood, or any other weapons with a really cool Ash of War that you want to spam, like Death's Poker or Zamor's Curve Sword. If you've got this on, you can increase your FP a stupid amount, spam the living hell out of your skill powers, meaning you can do even more damage to the bosses and regular enemies around. And then one of the last buffs I want to talk about in this particular segment is going to be the Rune Acquisition buff. Now, this does give you a 3.5% buff to your rune acquisition, and that gets applied to not only you but also your teammates if you're playing in co-op. This can be stacked, so essentially you can have a 10.5% buff to your rune acquisition if all 3 people are using this relic, and that also stacks with any golden fowl feats that you find, any passive buffs that you find after beating bosses, and of course the golden trees that are laid out across the map too. So you could essentially build up an insane rune acquisition boost, which is actually a lot more useful in co-op, because again there's been changes made to solo since the game's release that just makes rune acquisition easier anyway in solo. So you may not need it if you're a top player and are capable of beating basically all of the bosses around, especially those in the middle castle and any like key bosses in whatever event is also going on in the world. But if you're someone who's just starting out or maybe struggling to get to level 15 in your expeditions, this is of course a brilliant relic to be having. As like I just mentioned, it can all of a sudden become very easy to get a lot of runes really quickly, and essentially those are kind of like my personal favorites and my best ones to be using for any expedition related effects. So like I say, clearing all of those ever jails and invasions to give yourself a damage buff, utilizing extra rune acquisitions to obviously give yourself the best chance to get to level 15 every single game, and then also having things like the FP increase whenever you do unlock a Sorcerer's Rise is also again really useful. But that leads me on to the final subject matter of this video, which is relics based on your character. I am just going to be extremely generic here, and essentially this subject matter is just to point out that if you take all of the relics that we've looked at so far and look to boost your characters with those from the previous two subjects, if you have anything that improves or adds any bonus effects to either your skill or your ultimate art, so like for instance with Wilder, there are ones out there that basically make it so your ultimate art is an explosion but then leaves fire on the ground, dealing damage over time, and his skill will have a follow-up attack which also adds fire to his weapon. There are also other ones that make it so people like Iron Eye have poison on his art. Raider can get a buff to both his power output and stamina if he takes a hit whilst charging his skill, so again kind of like how we mentioned earlier. There's also another buff for trading during his punch or headbutt animation. Executor's art will actually restore HP with the raw attack, which actually grants quite a bit and is extremely useful. And even people like Recluse can also add things like Terra Magica to the effect of collecting that residue, again giving you an insane buff for essentially free, which is of course extremely handy. There's many more buffs for all of the other characters and also the ones that I've mentioned, and unfortunately I don't have footage for absolutely everything, but essentially here you want to be looking for anything that gives you a really good buff to your character's skill or ultimate art. So try and be on the lookout for things that give you, say, extra damage, or make you harder to detect, or possibly gives you a HP buff based on an action happening during your ultimate arts or skill powers, because that's just an extremely handy buff to have on top of everything else that we've mentioned so far. And then just really lastly, possibly the most important relic to be talking about is the change to damage effect on your starting armament. I cannot stress enough how important it is to first of all look at the boss you're going to be taking on and checking what is effective against them, because the game actually tells you. So for example, Tricephalos, the first boss, is weak to holy damage, so if you've got a buff that makes it so your starting armament deals holy damage, or even changes the Ash of War to a holy Ash of War like Sacred Blade, put that on so that you've got an immediate edge against the boss that you're fighting with, because if you go into the caves or mines in your expedition, you can guarantee yourself a purple Smithing Stone 2, which is the highest upgrade you can get, and if you're unfortunate enough to not find a blue one, which is the Smithing Stone 1, you can buy that from the Carles or merchants dotted around the map and get your starting weapon from a common weapon to a purple +2 weapon really easily. And even if you get this done super early in level 2, you can still be wielding a purple weapon at level 2. By having a weapon type that deals damage that is effective against the final night boss, you will be doing additional damage and also doing additional debuffs to the boss, making them a hell of a lot easier to deal with, which is why I'm making the statement at the end that this is possibly the most important effect you need to be looking out for, because it can literally make or break your final boss fights. But with that said, that is everything I'm going to cover in this video. Of course, there are a lot more effects out there. I'm by no means saying that they are terrible in any way, apart from the ones I mentioned earlier. But if there is anything else out there that you think I've overlooked or that I've just completely missed, please let me know in the comments, because I'm all ears, and I'm sure many others might find it handy if you found an effect that's extremely busted with a certain character or with a certain setup. So as I say, get down in the comments and let me know what you think of this video, and let me know if I've missed any buffs that are super busted. But other than that, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have done, I hope you don't mind me asking you just to hit that like button down below. That'd be greatly appreciated, as it helps these videos out a ton, and it lets me know that you've enjoyed them and you want to see more Nightreign videos like this in the future. We've just hit 40,000 subscribers, which is absolutely insane, so thank you again to everybody that has supported the channel so far. Like, genuinely, it's been incredible, and I still can't believe that many people are subscribed to the channel. So yeah, just thank you so much. We're obviously now moving on to getting towards 50,000 subscribers, so if you're not subscribed, also maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, and in return you'll be getting the most up-to-date videos around Nightreign and some extremely cool streams that you can be a part of. But other than that, I've said more than enough for this video, so again, thank you so much for watching. Have a great time using these relic buffs, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.